Hello there, my name's Mike Talty. I work for Microsoft in the UK, and you can find me at mtalty.com. You can mail me mtalty@microsoft.com, and you can find me on Twitter at mtalty. This is one of a number of short tutorials on the ActiveTuts website about Silverlight. Silverlight 4 is the latest release of Microsoft's rich internet application technology. If you're looking for more of a sort of overview video, then there is an overview video which is at http://activetuts/sl intro. So that takes you through a few things, kind of putting them together a little bit into a small application. In this particular video, what I wanted to talk about was animation. And animation is a pervasive system in Silverlight. Most things can be animated, and you can use that in lots of different places. We'll just look at the basics of it here, just to give you an idea of it. And whilst it's true that you can sit and create animations in a tool like Visual Studio, Visual Studio is kind of manual with respect to creating animation. So what we'll do here is we'll use Expression Blend, specifically Expression Blend 4, which is the design tool for Silverlight applications. If you don't have any of this tooling at this point, then the best place to go to get that set up, http://silverlight.net/get started, and that will point you towards a single download you can use to get hold of the Visual Studio, the free edition of that. Expression Blend, we have a trial edition of that, so you can get all those pieces ready to go. As I say, in this video I think I will solely be using Expression Blend, so that's kind of where we'll stay. Let's close that down and switch over to Expression Blend. Okay, so just spin up Expression Blend. And in here we'll just make a simple project. You'll find that Blend is much easier to use if you're on a nice monitor, a big monitor, or if you've got two monitors where you can drag these panels out of the environment. I'm running at a fairly restricted sort of netbook style resolution here just for the screen recording, so it does make things a little bit more difficult. Let's just do File, New Project in here and make a Silverlight application and just end up with an empty design canvas on the screen. Now, what I'd recommend is if you're working with animations, then this Objects and Timeline panel here becomes really important. And the best thing to do with it really is to dock it right across the bottom of the screen. So what I'll do is just take mine and drag it until you see the blue line go all the way across the bottom of the screen there. And at that point, if you release it, it should dock itself at the bottom of the screen, and we just size it down a little bit so that it's more reasonably sized. And I can just go back to the design surface and hit Control and 0 to automatically zoom that down to show everything on the design surface. So this is just useful because we're going to work with timelines that will display across here. Now, a little bit of theory about animations in Silverlight. There are really a couple of things to know about animations in Silverlight, so let's just open up what I call a whiteboard and let's just practice a little bit of theory around this. The first thing to know is that animations in Silverlight are not frame based, so they're not frame based, they are timeline based. So what you really do is you specify values for properties at different points in time, and the system then interpolates between those two values. The other thing to know is that there are three different things you can really animate with Silverlight animations. You can animate any double values, so if you've got things like widths and heights and so on, rotations, that kind of thing. You can animate point values, so the position of a rectangle, for instance, or the center of an object or something like that. Or particularly if you've got something like a path, you can animate those kinds of things. And you can animate color to use the US spelling values as well. And whilst this initially looks quite a limited little list, although it is possible to do some custom work around it, it turns out to be absolutely adequate for just about everything that I've ever come across. So you ultimately build up animations targeting doubles, points or colors, and you wrap those up into storyboards. And storyboards are literally just a collection of animations. Here ends the theory lesson. Okay, so let's look for something that we can animate. Let me just take a rectangle, and we'll just find that rectangle and draw one out onto the artboard. Again, I'm working at low resolution, so it's a little bit difficult to work at this resolution. But anyway, it's there, and let's go and put an image into that so that we can see it. So we'll go over to our project, and let's go to here and just right mouse to add an existing item. Could link to one actually as it happens, but we'll add one in. And I'll just go to C, Windows, Web, Wallpaper. Let's just go there. And there's various images in here. Let's go to Scenes and, oh, actually I don't like those. Let's go to Landscapes, that's much nicer. Let's take this one here and we'll just open that up. And we'll just go ahead and say, yes, let's embed that. And then we'll take that thing and insert it into the scene. But actually I don't want the whole image in the scene like that. What I want to do with it is I want to go and just make that into a brush. So I'm just going to make that into a brush, and that becomes a brush, and I can delete the image, but then I can go back to my rectangle, and if I just bring up my resources pane, which you'll find over there, then we've got a brush for that. So I can just go and say that I want to use that brush to fill this rectangle. So just drag it over there, and we can set that as the fill of my rectangle. So that's very easy. So we can see our rectangle. Let's do some animation around that rectangle. And so the way this works is down here there's a drop down of all of the storyboards that we've got available in this particular XAML file that we're looking at. And right now we don't have any, so this little button here, as you can see, relates to creating things. So we can make a new storyboard, or we can just click the plus sign, and that will create us a new storyboard. And the question is, what do you want to call it? And storyboard 1 is fine for what we're doing right now. And what this does is open up the timeline down here where you can start to build up animations. A couple of things about the timeline. Firstly, you can zoom it. All the controls with numbers like this in Blend, you can just sort of drag them up and down to expand that up and down. So we could maybe make this more of a, what should we do, say a 3-second period that we see here. And the other thing to say is that we have snapping on the timeline. So you can set snapping options as to how snappy the pointer moves. So you can see here there's 10 kind of points per second. Or you can always just go and switch that off if it gets on your nerves. So sometimes I find if you're working with short animations, it can get a bit tricky to have this snapping switched on, and so sometimes you switch it off. For the minute I'll just leave it on there. That's fine for me for now. And so let's animate something. Let's say that perhaps at 1 second here, let's take our rectangle as it is, and you'll notice that the environment has moved into recording mode. This is really crucial. You'll miss this from time to time. I still miss it today. The whole artboard has gone kind of a red border around it. This little red circle indicates we're in recording mode. I could turn it off. There's a little red dot down here as well, which would let me turn it on and off. So I could turn it off there, I can turn it back on there, I can, you get the idea as to how that works. That means that any property changes you make right now are not property changes really to the object, they're property changes as part of the animation. So for instance, I could go to the properties grid over here, and I could change something about this. We could change its width or height, or I could just go to the artboard and I could just resize it there. That's the other thing I could do. So I could hit maybe just let's resize that in place there. I'm using the Alt key just to size it up a little bit. And you'll notice that what we just did, if we take a look at, it's not often we switch into XAML here, but let's just take a look at what we just did from a XAML perspective behind this. I'll just hit F4 to resize the environment. You'll notice that Expression Blend has put a render transformation onto my rectangle, and it has created a storyboard, and it's put 2 double animations in there of duration 1 second, and what it's doing is it's changing the scale X and Y properties on my rectangle's transformation with that particular storyboard. So as we were drawing that stuff, Blend was creating a storyboard for us. I'll switch back to the designer and bring back the panels with the F4 function key. And so what we've got now is if we move the playhead around on the design surface, you can see that it shows us what's going to happen with that animation. I can just hit the play button and it'll show me how that's going to work, and that animation is going to do that, and that's as you would expect. So we built up that animation over 1 second. If we actually just expand out here, you would see what is actually being animated. You can see it's the scale X and it's the scale Y that are actually being animated down there. So it really can show you what's being animated. And the little red circle indicates there is an animation to this property in play in this storyboard. I don't know if we can just size that a little bit differently for the minute. Just size that back down. Now we said that a storyboard is not just one animation, so let's animate something else about this thing. Let's go ahead and maybe spin it around or something like that. So we could do that within the existing 1 second interval, or we could go say to 2 seconds over here, and let's just make sure we got our rectangle selected, and let's find its transformation in the transform section here, and we'll just specify a 360-degree rotation. And if we take a look at what happens with that, let's go back to the start of our timeline, hit play. It's interesting, you'll notice that the rectangle grows up to size and then spins round. Now maybe that's what I wanted and maybe it's not. What the designer just did for me was it used a keyframe in the animation. So essentially you can see that this rotation property, if we look at this little keyframe we've got here, then you would see that at that point in time the value is 0, and as we move the playhead forward it rotates towards 360. Now maybe that's what I wanted, and maybe it's not. It's kind of up to me really. What I can do is I can move this keyframe, so we could just move it down here. So what will happen now is that we're saying that about, and you notice that snapping is now sort of being a bit interesting for me. If we go back to the beginning here and play, then once again we get that idea that it's growing and starting to rotate whilst it still grows. Or actually maybe what I want to do on that particular property is just get rid of that keyframe and say that at 2 seconds we'll be at 360 and we start sort of nowhere. We go back to the beginning. You can see that we're now growing and spinning. We grow up to 1 second and then we spin. And if I wanted to make it such that we grow and spin over a whole 2-second period, I could just take this guy and slide him over here as well. And then what we've got, if we run it again, is we will grow whilst we spin. As you can see, we're growing up whilst we're spinning. So you have this lot of flexibility around how these sorts of things are combined together. Let's try and illustrate some other things that are going on here. So I'll try and simplify what we've got by perhaps removing these particular bits of the animation, or perhaps we should create another storyboard. No, let's just get rid of these bits of the animation and do it that way. So they've all gone. Let's take my rectangle now and just put it up here for a moment so I can try and illustrate something else. We'll just resize it. And you'll notice actually I've just made my own mistake in that I was in storyboard mode and that wasn't what I wanted to do. So let's move the rectangle really and then go into storyboard mode and start recording animations for it. I said I would hit that, and I always do. So let's just imagine I want to do something simple, like I want to move the rectangle. So let's say at 1 second I want the rectangle to be here. And we've built that animation, that's fine. And let's say at 2 seconds I want the rectangle to be there, and we've built that animation, so you can see the rectangle does exactly what I wanted it to do. Now what we're doing is we're just doing a sort of linear interpolation between the keyframes that you see on the designer down there. And so we don't have to do a linear interpolation. What we could do is select one of those keyframes. So we can say, oh, look, on this particular keyframe here we can use a spline, or we can go and take that, and rather than be linear we can affect that. So let's say what we wanted to do is maybe start off really fast and slow down, so you can see how that's going to work. And let's take a look at that now. That's linear, that's not, that's linear, that's not. Or we can be more fancy and use something like an easing function. We have a bunch of easing functions in the designer. You can write your own as well if you don't find what you want here. But just to make this really obvious, let's take something like, I don't know, let's take a back ease, something like that. And we're only applying it on this portion of the keyframe, so we can just say linear back ease. And you see how that's kind of going, linear and then back ease. And we could pick this particular keyframe over here and pick a different easing function. Let's do a nice smooth cubic ease on that. So we should get some nice smooth, oh wait a minute, let's go back to the beginning of the timeline, nice smooth animation and then a sort of jagged back ease on that one over there. So we can apply easing functions to these animations as they're running along. And we also said that we could animate colors. So for instance, let's just, in fact we'll scrap what we have on the screen just at the moment, so let's just get rid of this animation sort of altogether. So we'll just go over here and delete this storyboard. So we got rid of storyboard 1 there. And let me just go to this rectangle and change its fill to be solid red. And we can animate that. So let's create a new storyboard, which can also be storyboard 1. I'll just say at 1 second here, let's go to a different color, which might be green. And we can see that we can go from red to green over that period. And again, if we wanted perhaps to pop through a different color value around this point, let's go to purple at that point. We go back, so now we're going red to purple, and then we're going to green. And again, we could select a portion of this, so let's just select this portion here, and we could apply an easing function. It hurts my head to think about what a back easing function means on that animation, but we could still go and apply it and see how that kind of looks. It looks a bit odd, but you get the idea as to how we're animating colors. And we can also animate points. So let's scrap this animation again. Let's just delete this one, add another animation. In fact, let's take this object here and let's go from it being a rectangle and let's make it into a path. So we'll convert it into a path, and then let's go and add another storyboard here. So we'll add a storyboard, and we could say that at 1 second here, if we select our little point tool, let's take this point and just move it over here, maybe that one, just take that one over there, and maybe that one over there. I'm just messing around with it really. And let's just play that animation, and we should be able to see that we can manipulate that object like that by doing point animations on there as well. So within these three animation types you can pretty much animate anything that you like. What about actually controlling these animations? Well, we can control them from code. That's one thing that we could do. So if we were to say just take a little button somewhere here, let's find a button, and we'll just drop a button onto the design surface down here, and we could write some code against that even in Expression Blend. So let's just go and select it. Let's find its properties over here and just step out of timeline recording mode. Let's find its properties over here and go to the events, and we'll just handle its click event. And what we can do is get hold of that storyboard. I'll just hit the F4 key here to bring up the code editor, and we could find that storyboard. So the way we do that is say storyboard, let's call it my storyboard, and what we want to do is reach into our resources, and our storyboard in there is called storyboard 1. We want to get that as a storyboard, and then we can say my storyboard dot, and there's all kinds of things we can do with it, but one thing we could do is just say begin. Let's go back to the design surface, and we can just run this by saying F5 or project. We can go and run with F5, so just press F5 on this, and Blend should compile that and run it up. I don't know if we've made the UI resizable or not, but hit our button, it's running the storyboard as you can see. Notice that hitting the button again doesn't have any effect because the object is already at the positions that the storyboard animates it to, so there's kind of nothing to do, which is a bit of an interesting thing. So if we went back over to the design environment over here, I just hit the F4 key to bring the panels back in. So there's a couple of things we could do around that. One would be we could go to the storyboard itself over here and just select it, and we could tell it, for instance, to reverse itself. So if we just hit the function 5 F5 key again, we run this back up, and now our storyboard will go to the values and back again, so that when we rerun it, it's still a valid animation. It's still going to do something. You might have spotted we can also set repeat behavior here, so if we wanted that to happen forever, for instance, we can just go ahead and do that, and now we've created a storyboard that will just run on and on until we stop it in some fashion. We might do that with code or some other means. Let's just take those away for the moment. The other thing we could do is create a storyboard that works in the opposite direction. So we could kind of manually do what we just did automatically. So if we went to this storyboard here and just duplicated it to make a copy, and then what we could do on that copy is reverse it. So we've just created an inverse storyboard. Let's switch out of recording mode, maybe get ourselves another button over here, so we could just go and have another button. Let's go to that button and set its properties. We'll find its events, and into its click event here let's just say reverse something like that. I'll hit F4 in the environment just to size that so you can see it, and we'll steal this code because it's pretty much the same code. And let's just go and say, well, what we want to do is storyboard copy 1 and begin that. I think that's what it was called. Let me just check back in the designer that it was called storyboard copy 1. And so if we just run that with our F5 key, then we've got one storyboard that takes this up to that size and another storyboard that brings it back down. So we've got the inverse of that. The other thing that we could do, just going back again, is we could have a different end behavior on the storyboard we've got. Now, I must admit, I'm not entirely sure that you can do this in the designer. I certainly don't know exactly where you do it. But what I could do is visit our original storyboard. So let me just move out to storyboard mode again. I'm just going to pop to the XAML definition of it. Just hit F4 so that you can see that properly. Here's our original storyboard, and what I could say is it has a property in it called the fill behavior. And at the moment we're holding the end value, but what we could do is stop. So if we ran that, let me just go and press F5 again here. What we should find is our initial animation now animates up and then stops, and animates up and then stops, and you get the idea as to how that's different from reversing. So you can definitely do that as well. There may be a designer flag for that. I'm not quite sure it was, so I'm just going to undo that in the XAML and go back to the design view and hit F4 again to bring those panels back in. But running storyboards is such a common thing that you wouldn't want to necessarily write code in order to do that. So let's just look at a different way of doing this. Let's remove our UI elements right now. And by the way, if you do remove UI elements that have storyboards attached to them, like this one, I'm just going to delete it. You'll see that Blend will tell you, I've got rid of some animations because you took away the elements that they were animating. So if we go back to our storyboards, the animations on those elements have gone away. So what I'll do is just delete that storyboard, and we'll just open that one up and delete that one as well. So I've no storyboards and I've no UI. So let's just go and put our image back into the scene. So we just go to the project and just insert that. We'll just make it a lot smaller than it is. So I'm just going to size it down and bring it back over here. We've got our image back in the middle of the scene. Let's just go to the grid that lives behind that and set its properties such that it has a gradient fill on it. So let's just expand that out a little bit and give it a gradient. Maybe just take that gradient perhaps from a sort of deep blue color or something like that at the top, down here to perhaps a lighter blue somewhere down there. And let's just give it a couple more gradient stops in the middle where we'll just make it kind of light, and again kind of light. So we're just kind of giving it a little bit of a sort of horizon really in the middle. And let's say we want to build an animation that makes this particular picture stand out a little bit. So let's go back to the picture and let's give it an effect. So here's its effect. We'll just give it a new effect of a drop shadow effect and just drop that on there, and it's got a little drop shadow on it right now. And let's just go and add a storyboard to that. So we'll go and create a new storyboard. Storyboard 1 is still kind of fine. And let's just say that over a half-second period what we'll do is we'll just take that item and we'll scale it up a little bit. So we'll go and say what we want to do is scale it. So we just go to its transform here and we'll scale it maybe by 1.3 or something like that, and 1.3, something like that. And let's also just give it a little bit of a rotation. So we'll just say give it a 20-degree rotation, something like that. And let's just give it a little bit of translation. So I'm just going to select it and let's just grab that rectangle and just drag it down a little bit, something like that. I suppose we could be a little bit cheeky and just kind of rotate it a bit around the not the z-axis, excuse me, the x-axis as well. So let's just rotate it a little bit around that as well. I'm not sure that was a great idea, but you get the idea as to what we're trying to do. And let's just see how that looks. Let's just go from there to there. So we just got that kind of emphasis on that rectangle. And let's add a bit more of the drop shadow to it. So let's find its drop shadow again. Just add that guy and find its effect. And we'll just give that shadow a bunch more depth, just so that we can kind of really see that. And again, let's just test that out. So we've got that kind of emphasis on that thing. And let's go and build the reverse. So let's stop recording this one. Let's duplicate it. And then on the duplicate here, which is just called a copy, let's go and reverse. So we've got the reverse animation in there as well. And probably what I'd want to do is something like when the mouse wanders into the image, we'd pop that animation. And so what we can do with that, and we're really leading into another topic here, is we can use what we call behaviors inside of Expression Blend. And we have these control storyboard actions that you see here. So what I could do is just drag a couple of those onto this rectangle. And I'm going to add 2. Oops, I've lost it. I'm going to add 2. And then if we look down in our object and timeline down here, and at this point I may resize the environment a little bit, but let's find the first one of those and look at its properties over here. Bear with me. I'm just going to close the storyboard off and drag this panel up here so I can use it a bit more easily at this resolution, because we've created our storyboards now. That's easier for me. Right, so what I can do is now take this thing, and with its properties I can say what I want you to do is play storyboard 1 when the mouse enters the image. And on the other action I can say when the mouse leaves the image, I want you to play the copy. Let's press F5 and test that in the environment, or at least test it in the runtime. So as we go in we get that, and as we come out we do that. And you can see we've got this declarative thing going on now around our animation, so you don't have to write code in order to cause these things to happen. That's a whole area that's known as actions, behaviors and triggers, and what I'll do is I'll make a separate kind of tutorial around that idea. But hopefully you've got the basics as to how we do animations in the environment, that they're timeline based with interpolations that you can apply, easing functions and so on. We didn't actually apply any easing to this, so I suppose we could go back and just go back and open up the storyboards. You'll notice I've now made my environment a bit difficult to work with from an animation perspective, so let's drag this back down to the bottom. And we could apply some kind of easing functions to these things, so we could just pop over here and find easing function on one of these animations, and we could make that into something that was a bit more smooth. We could go for a cubic ease on there, we could go for a cubic ease on there, and we've got a couple of others in here. We could go for a cubic ease on there as well. So we've added a little bit of smoothness. Press F5 again to run this back up. We should have a slightly smoother animation going on as we're doing that. Always makes things feel more natural and nice to work with. So you get the idea as to how that works. The timeline based, we can animate points, we can animate colors, we can animate any double value, we can reverse these things, we can make their interaction declarative, and hopefully get an idea as to how that works inside of Expression Blend. That whole subject of these behaviors I'll come back to and talk about in a subsequent sort of follow-on video, because that's a big topic and it's not just about animation.